Perfect.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for registering and signing up for this webinar. I think it's extremely timely as we are into the pandemic and hopefully coming to near the end or moving into a new phase of it anyway, becoming an endemic. But Kira is going to discuss the ups and downs of competitive curling during the pandemic. She's going to be speaking about the disappointment of event cancellations, how to train and adapt during these uncertain times. This webinar is going to provide an insight on how to stay motivated and train during a pandemic. Visualization, mind-body connection, and internal motivation will all be discussed. Kira is very experienced as a competitive curler. She's been at 10 provincial and 3 national championships. She's won, let me rephrase that, 10 provincials and 3 national championships at various levels. She's in her final year of sports psychology undergrad degree at Laurentian University and is currently an intern with the Ontario Curling Council. She most recently appeared as the 5th player for Team Northern Ontario at the 2021 Scott Tournament of Hearts. So Kira brings a wealth of information with her. She's engaging, and I'm so glad that, Kira, that you agreed to do this webinar. So take it away, please.
Thank you, Andrea, for that lovely introduction. First of all, hi everyone, I'm Kira. Thanks for joining me. So as Andrea said, I'm going to be talking about competitive curling during the pandemic. As both a sports psychology student and a competitive curler myself. So I'll obviously be talking about the challenges as well as my perspective as a curler and my perspective as a sports psychology student. And as interesting as it might sound, those two don't always coincide well with each other. So, but I'm excited to get started and talk to you about all of the issues that are relevant today. 1 second. There we go. Yeah, so I think that the pandemic has affected youth curlers probably the most, just because just because you only have so many years of competition at that age. Like U18, you probably only have 2 or 3. U20 is the same, and U Sport and college nationals as well. So I can speak from experience that these curlers are putting a lot of pressure on themselves and, you know, making goals and planning for those years because they want to make the most of those experiences and achieve as much success as possible from those big events. And, you know, we've seen the trend of top curlers coming up through the junior ranks and basically winning everything. So I think those curlers are putting a lot of pressure on themselves to, you know, do the same thing if they want to be successful going into men's and women's curling. So one of my goals for this webinar is to kind of challenge that narrative and that script and sort of reframe the mentality in a way that obviously still encourages that drive for success, but provides an alternative perspective that might be more internally motivated and progress driven in terms of always working towards improvement as a person and an athlete first, rather than focusing on winning. So first, we're going to talk about reframing challenges. So in terms of event cancellation, it's really important that we find internal forms of motivation. And what I mean by that is finding reasons within ourselves to continue to train and improve rather than simply, you know, trying to be good for the next big event. Internal motivation is really important because we really never know these days, like which events are going to get canceled and which ones are still going to run. Just for an example, you know, this season, my mixed doubles partner and I, we spent most of the fall traveling and playing a lot, trying to qualify for mixed doubles Olympic trials. And we just narrowly missed out on qualifying. But throughout that entire process, well, it ended up getting canceled anyways, but throughout that entire process, we just kept reminding ourselves and repeating that no matter what the outcome, we worked really hard, just doing what we were doing, and we did everything we could to achieve that goal. So we can be proud of that. But a lot of times in our sport, our mentality is so important, and how we frame and reframe self-talk can make a huge difference in how we view ourselves in our sport. Another challenge that we've been experiencing a lot in the last 2 years is lack of ice time. So an alternative would be finding different forms of training. We'll discuss this further in the presentation, but there are really so many components to curling, and we can improve those components on or off the ice. So it's just about being creative. Another possible challenge would be lack of motivation, especially for individuals who are maybe more outcome driven. So if you lose that, let's say, carrot that you've been chasing all year, they might have a hard time remotivating themselves to get back out and train. But basically, we're just kind of going to try and flip the script and think more internally motivated outcomes. So coping with event cancellation. Something that I want to speak about was the struggles of maybe qualifying for an event for it to be canceled. I know U18s were canceled and U Sports and mixed doubles, but some of those are getting rescheduled. But even still, it can be really upsetting if you worked hard to qualify for something and then like you're just let down by it being canceled. So what's really important is to first just, let yourself be disappointed and feel those emotions and kind of work through that. It's also important to maintain the belief that, your big moment or event will come. And what I mean by that is, even if your event gets canceled this year, you just have to rely on your love of the sport and finding ways to stay motivated and get better every day. And that's regardless of whether you can find ice time or not. You'll find ways to be successful, and eventually those events and big moments we're all looking forward to in sport will come. Another important aspect would be to feed your love of the game. So what I mean by that is watch as much curling as possible, talk about it with friends and family, have team meetings and strategy discussions, make the most out of league curling if you still have it. It's really important to reiterate the narrative that what's most important is our love of the game, and that should always come first. And we've talked about this a little bit already, but find alternative forms of motivation. And what I mean by this is many people will use big events like provincials and nationals to plan their season. And of course, that makes a lot of sense. But what we want to see happen, especially recently in terms of cancellations, is for that not to be our sole form of motivation to keep pushing and practicing. And that brings us into internal motivation. So obviously it's increasingly important to find those internal forms of motivation. And the important thing is that you will be able to maintain your motivation throughout the season and off season, regardless if you have those quote unquote carrots to keep chasing, especially since we're constantly training for those events and pushing hard to get there. But we have to think about what happens if those events get taken away. So internal motivation might look different for everybody. We all have our reasons and our drives to do things. And what's most important is that you're always focused on improvement and personal growth over winning. And this type of motivation will not be canceled. So you can hold on to it whether the event happens or not. And that's why it's really important to find internal motivation. No matter what the season holds, you'll always be working towards something, and something will always be pushing you to be better and still train for the future. And that brings us into alternative forms of training. So this can look different for every individual and every team. And some examples that I've just listed off the top of my head are physical fitness training, visualization, sports psychology sessions, and team dynamics activities. So when doing these and many other forms of alternative training, it's really important to build good habits and take it as seriously as you would on ice training, meaning that you would incorporate journaling and planning, goal setting, and consistency. And I'm going to open up the conversation if anybody wants to add on any forms of alternative training that they've implemented this year.
Anybody put their teams into another program or?
And just Kira, just Peter here. Yeah, absolutely. All four of these. I would also add in, you know, a great tool is YouTube and previously played games by other competitors. So you can go through and have discussions about strategy, play the game as they're going, and have the strategy discussions so you can see different scenarios and incorporate that as well.
Yeah, that's great.
I think Peter raises a really good point that YouTube can be used as a training tool, right? Like for physical training, when you can't get to the gym is closed and you're looking for something, that you can often find it on YouTube.
Definitely. Most of the curling games on my YouTube have red lines under them.
Dick Henderson says other sports, playing other sports if they're available.
Yeah, definitely.
I just want to point out that there's probably a great respect for schools now that are incorporating the curling game into the schools, which you're not on the ice, but you are introducing the students to the sport of curling in the gymnasium. So that's a great tool. It's a form of training, and we've had lots of people incorporate themselves into the game of curling, phoning us and saying, well, what's this all about? Because my child has learned this and they want to learn more about it. So it's a great avenue to present the sport into from the school system.
Yeah, that's perfect. Like rocks and rings and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, all of that.
Awesome. So thank you all for your input. We're gonna move on and just talk about action focus versus result focus. So action focus is basically when individuals are concentrating their energies on getting the job done and not worried about the praise and recognition they'll receive from winning. So it's more of an internal form of recognition. And the advantages would be you experience greater satisfaction from consistently achieving high goals. You always choose new learning opportunities, even if you risk making mistakes in order to improve your skills. You give consistently high effort and persist even in the face of failure. And you're more focused on your own success and improvement than you are on winning. And that is comparable to result focused, which is more of an external form of recognition. So you're more visibly happy when you're successful. So advantages would be you work really hard to win. Competitions get you excited and motivated to practice and improve. And you can draw future validation from your past success. So that just means, you know, thinking back on winning can get you psyched up for big games. And now I'm sure you guys are starting to see where I'm going with these two results based on the pandemic. But the disadvantages to action focus would be that there's a possibility of lack of drive to win. And the disadvantages for result focused would be that you won't risk new learning experiences if you think you might fail. And that could really impact your long-term improvement. You also only perform your best when you're evenly matched against your opponent. So that's just playing down to either younger teams or teams that aren't quite at the same level as you. And against weaker opponents, you tend to be very confident. And against stronger opponents, you tend to lack confidence. So this is a two-part question. Let's see. My question for you now is, what approach do you think is most effective in general? And do you think the correct situation affects your answer to this question? The current situation, so the pandemic.
Any thoughts? Don't be shy.
The first thing that comes to mind for me, Kira, is that it's not one or the other. It's a spectrum across. We have 4 players, 4 individual personalities, and each individual personality will be motivated in different ways. And it's sort of working on the spectrum to find the sweet spot between those 2 poles to get the team functioning at its optimum.
Yeah, I totally agree. You already got my trick question.
We have another question on the chat. How can a coach support this internal form of recognition? So moving down, beyond carry on, but just wanted to slip that in there.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely important to do types of personality tests with your teams to see, who performs best in which way. So if you have some teammates who are more action focused or result focused, you have to kind of tailor your pre and post game towards those individuals. So yeah, I guess I would say ideally you would use parts of both action focus and result focus. Like Peter was saying, you kind of want the best of both worlds. Like you don't want a lack of drive to win, but you also don't want overconfidence or underconfidence.
So how can a coach support the internal form of recognition, Kira?
Yeah, so let's just go back for a second. Oops. So basically, you want to always have high goals for your team and have good learning opportunities, and encourage high effort.
Would journaling help?
Yeah, of course. We're going to get to that a little bit later too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a question. Is it possible to have a copy of this PowerPoint presentation sent to us individually afterwards?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. All right. I have a quiz for you. You can answer in the chat. But this is to see if you're action focused or result focused. So you can answer questions 1 through 3 in the chat.
I'm watching the chat. I'm not, oh, there we go. Yes, yes, and yes. Can't control outcomes, but you can control the processes. Yes, yes, yes. Yes to all three. One, yeah. Two, yes. Three, yes. All above. Yes, 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 yes. Coach's mindset, LOL, but maybe not athletes. True that, eh?
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, this is just to provide a little bit of self-reflection and maybe encouragement if you bring questions like this to your athletes, to sort of subtly tell them to start thinking about things this way with more of like goal planning and journaling and stuff in mind. Now we'll see if any of the coaches are result focused.
Yes, no, no. I spend time planning every day. Yes, I evaluate my progress. I am focused on the desired result. Yes to all. Yes, no, no. Oh, lots of yes, no, no. No, yes, no, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, no, no. Yes, no, no.
Awesome. Thank you all for participating. So like we've said before, there's just advantages and disadvantages to both techniques, and neither are wrong and neither are right. But I think especially during the pandemic, action focused is more important to focus on. So now we're gonna talk about some training techniques and skills to learn and practice off the ice. So the first one we're going to talk about is imagery. So imagery is the use of visualization to imagine situations. It can effectively enhance motor performance. The brain cannot tell the difference between an actual physical event and the vivid visualization of the same event. So this is very interesting. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But imagery is much more effective than no practice, and in certain situations as effective as physical practice. Ideally, a combination of both imagery, mental practice, and physical practice is best, but obviously we're in different times right now, and any form of practice is better than no practice at all. What's really exciting for curlers, I find anyways, especially during the pandemic, is that our sport has a huge mental component in terms of strategy and execution. So we're really fortunate in that we can find a lot of creative ways to train off the ice, even out of the gym for that matter. Gyms are closed too. So how are we going to apply imagery into our daily lives? So to perform imagery, I think it's really important to have a general understanding of how it works. I mean, I could sit here and tell you to be a good curler, you have to practice imagery every day and move on, but I don't think that will really motivate anyone to actually put it into practice. So we're going to take a deeper dive and talk more about the theory behind imagery. So there's the psychoneuromuscular theory, which basically is the brain muscle connection. So neuromuscular patterns are formed during imagery and they're identical to those used during the actual movement. So even though the imagined activity doesn't actually result in movement of a muscular nature, subliminal efferent commands are still sent to the brain and from the brain to the muscles. So essentially, your brain continues to practice sending the same signals even though you're not physically moving. An example would be visualizing your slide with all the various components on repeat, which would be a very effective form of psychoneuromuscular visualization theory. Another theory is the symbolic learning theory, which basically it's task-oriented, and it suggests that mental imagery works because the individual will literally plan out all of their actions in advance. It's kind of like a script. So you're using motor sequences and task goals and alternative solutions to cognitively before the physical action is required. So you can think of this as if you're planning your specific reaction for every situation before it even happens. And a curling example would be strategically planning out the next few calls in advance. Another theory is attention and arousal set theory, which basically means that imagery improves performance in two ways: by helping the athlete adjust to arousal level for optimal performance, and help the athlete selectively attend to the task at hand. So basically, this theory is all about learning what arousal level is best for you for optimal performance through visualization. And also knowing how to get yourself to that level of energy. So for example, let's say I curl my best when I'm at a 4 out of 10 on an energy scale. Well, during my visualization practice, I might visualize myself at, let's say, a 7. So I'm a little bit too excited. So I would practice techniques to bring myself back down to a 4, whether that's deep breathing exercises or meditation. And then the other component is the attention component. And that really just means that you've taught yourself how not to think past the next step. So you're living presently in the moment. And you can do this through practice. So basically, anytime that you're thinking too far in advance, you want to just pay attention to that and know how to bring yourself back to the present moment. So it's similar to reframing in that when you start to think about the outcome, just remind yourself where you are and what you need to do next. And just in summary, I think all of these theories make a lot of sense. So I think the best approach would be a combination approach, especially since everyone's different in terms of how their brain works and processes information. So ideally, you would want to teach your athletes all of the theories of imagery, and maybe one of them will stick more with them than another. So yeah, I also recommend keeping a journal for this, just to document what works and what doesn't. Does anyone have any questions about that before we move on?
Kira?
Yep.
Peter here once again, just sort of linked into this and the journaling. We had worked with a retired professor now, Dr. Jane Crossman, at the time at Lakehead. And I was working with a very young, I guess, 2 12-year-olds, 13-year-old, and a 14-year-old at the time, Bantam U18. Well, we had a sheet with 6 questions, I think it was 6 or 8 questions on it, that sort of addressed the whole attention and arousal. How are you feeling? What are your thoughts on? And it was something that we had as part of the team routine, more appropriate for a much younger, but obviously as the teams are getting older and getting more mature, you would adjust that. But it's a great thing to get them focused, and then you take a look at what the performances were and you get an idea of their mental state, how they were before the game and how they ended up performing, and then you can have discussions about that at that time.
Yeah, I love incorporating that before the game and after the game. Whether that's with like a team sheet where everybody writes them down together, or if everybody has their own journal. I definitely used to do that and still do that today, where I just kind of note how I'm feeling before the game versus after in terms of energy. And I've just found that I play my best at a 4, and you can just tie that into team dynamics too, right? Because if your teammates are playing at a 7 or an 8 in a big game and they don't normally do that, you can say, well, like I'm not at my optimal level, and I think that everybody, like we have to go back down to where we normally play our best. So just making sure that everybody's aware of what energy level they need to be at, and also reminding each other like when you need to sort of put that in check.
I think I've got a question about the just exactly what you're talking about in terms of when it is that they have to bring their energy level up and bring their energy level down. Can you specifically hone in on what it is that our teams need to look at for themselves as a team or individually?
I think it all just comes down to a lot of self-awareness, and that might come from a lot of curling and a lot of reps and playing. So you might not know at the age of like 12 or 13 or 14 how you perform your best. It's kind of a learning curve, right? So that's why I think journaling is so important. You can keep track of what you need and your growth going forwards. In terms of getting either more energy or less energy, breathing techniques, meditation, stuff like that is all really good for bringing your energy down. And for getting psyched up, you can use pep talks or have like certain jokes or like inside jokes with the team. A lot of people, I know a lot of coaches have binders with motivational quotes or inspirational photos. So that can really help get the team pumped up for big games or if they're low energy. Does that answer the question?
Well, it gives me a certain insight in what I can do as a coach to give them a sense of the application of imagery, that overall heading, and some of the strategies that we can use to give them that aspect, because I'm dealing with youth curlers, and some of them are very motivated, but they don't have the knowledge and the aspect of this type of presentation to be able to bring themselves into what it is that's going on in their new found sport, so to speak. Okay.
Yeah.
Kira?
Yep.
Just a question of timing. Is there an optimal time or age in which we should be focusing on mental training? I know that, and Andrea can help me with this, that strength training is best applied during growth spurts. I forget what the technical term for that is, but is there the same kind of time frame?
Peak height velocity?
That's what it is. Good for you. I just wanted to see if you were still awake.
Of course.
Anyway, it's just the time. That's always like when Peter was working with the 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds, like, is that a time to be focusing on these mental things? Or?
Yeah, I think in terms of mental training, it's more about level of maturity than it is age. So you might have a 12-year-old who has the maturity of a 14-year-old, and you could start introducing mental training to them. But if you have an athlete who comes to you and hears about sports psychology, either when they're watching curling or something, and they maybe want to try it, I think that's a good time. But I don't think you can really introduce it at too young of an age. You might just have to be more, it might have to be more simplified, if that makes sense.
Yeah, is there a measure or anything that we as coaches could use to determine their mental state, I guess?
You know what? I'm not sure, but I will look into it after this presentation. Maybe I'll email you.
There'll be a research paper for you. Come on.
Perfect. I love homework.
Yeah, the stuff that we were doing at that time was very rudimentary. Like you said, and you said it perfectly, just the introduction of mental training. 3 of those players ended up going to junior nationals, and by the time they got to 18 and 19, we were much more in depth as to the level of discussion, as to mental makeup, the arousal, and all of that. So yeah, very, very appropriately at the youngest age, the simplest of introductions, and then building it up as they mature.
Yeah, and you can even just ask them questions about, you know, how they go about processes before they shoot, or after the game, in terms of how they deal with stress and anxiety. Like if they're at a maturity level where they can have those types of conversations about pregame routines and stuff and how it affects their shooting, then that's a good indication of that they're ready to be introduced to more mental training. So if everyone's okay, I'm gonna switch over to the next slide. And we're gonna talk about visualization during physical exercise. So basically this is talking about the mind-muscle connection, and how we can put it into practice. So, you know, we can use our mind-body connection during exercise to enhance muscle use and connectivity. So there have actually been studies done that show that when we use and work our muscles more effectively when we're focused on certain muscle groups in our mind. So just for example, if you imagine yourself pushing out of the hack, try to focus on what muscles you're activating and where you feel the most pressure and strain. And then the next time you're in the gym, whether you're squatting or doing lunges or whatever it is, try focusing on those same muscle groups that you're activating from kicking out of the hack. And you can apply that to sweeping as well. I think the next step for curling would be to, you know, do more research into what muscle groups are being activated when we're sweeping and such. I know at Laurentian, in some of our lab classes, we had shirts that were so high tech that they could tell you what muscles you were using when you did certain activities. So I think definitely a next step for curling would be to take that into more practice and use those on young athletes for their sweeping technique, because everybody sweeps differently and we use different muscles in different ways when they're sweeping. So in terms of technology, that would probably be our next step. But for now, if you can get your athletes to really think about what muscles they're using during different activities on the ice, that'll help them with their physical exercise off the ice. So just further application, I kind of went too far when I was talking on the last slide, but practice visualizing your muscle contracting during your next workout. And, you know, again, what I said before, but it's just really important to master focusing on the muscles that are in action. And then like your last step would be to try and engage those muscles when you're not even in motion. So that's just another form of visualization where if the gyms are closed and you have no equipment at home, you can be doing squats, but if you're visualizing that you have a lot of weight on your shoulders, you're going to get more out of those squats. So it's just interesting how our mind works. We can convince ourselves that we're doing more work than we actually are.
But does it actually work? Right now, there's a forever growing body of psychological research to demonstrate how mental imagery can be used to increase performance across every sport imaginable. But perhaps the most famous study was one conducted at the University of Chicago, in which 3 groups of participants were asked to take a series of free throws. These groups were then separated into 3 conditions. Group 1, who were made to practice free throws every day for an hour. Group 2, who were made to visualize practicing free throws every day for an hour. And Group 3, who did neither of these things. After 30 days, the researchers tested them again and found that Group 1 improved by 24%. And Group 2, the mental imagery group, improved by 23% without even touching a basketball. And Group 3 didn't improve at all, which was expected. Other studies have demonstrated that visualizing playing the piano activates the region of the brain connected to the finger muscles in the same way that it does for people actually playing the piano. And another showed that following a simple 15-minute mental imagery script can increase the amount of weight athletes can bench press and deadlift. So if it works, what are the actual benefits? Well, many. And ultimately, these will feed into improved overall performance. But underneath these lie a number of individual benefits. You've got increased skill development, given that mental imagery can be practiced during times in which an athlete is injured or their body is exhausted or they just want that extra boost. This was key for the late Kobe Bryant. We've all heard stories of the intensity with which he trained. So when his body was physically done for the day, he would spend extra hours in a room on his own playing out every possible shot in the next upcoming match. You've then got increased confidence. If you played out the scenario in your head 10 times, you're going to be far more confident in going through with it or seizing that moment when it arises in real life. And on increasing confidence, it also helps you prepare for tough moments, because mental imagery is not just about the successes, the game-winning shot or crossing the finish line. It's about understanding that you're going to face particular hurdles and setbacks, and you need to develop a mental roadmap so that when they do arise in real life, you can easily and more successfully get out of them. This was key for Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian of all time, when in 2008, during the 200-meter butterfly Olympic final, crisis struck with his goggles filling with water. By the last few lengths, he could see nothing at all, but for years he had visualized every type of race to perfection. His method was to put in a mental videotape and play it out so much so that he would remember every single stroke. So he trusted his videotape despite racing blind and ended up breaking yet another world record in that race. And lastly, it reduces your stress and anxiety, which are arguably the main causes of athletic failures, losses, and opportunities squandered. Mental imagery gives us a greater sense of control over events, and that in turn makes us feel safer and more secure in our performance.
That's great. What a great video.
But does it actually work? Right now, there's a forever...
There we go. Yeah, so moving past imagery and into journaling, we did talk about this a little bit already, but I think journaling is really important to be used throughout the season and in the off season to keep track of your training and your progress. So it can be used to hold yourself accountable and help achieve goals. It can also be used to monitor trends. So I've been using journaling for years, and it's actually really encouraging to look back through old journals and notice trends in performance. And several key aspects that I normally track are things like the amount of sleep before a game, what I've eaten before a game, energy level before and after, tracking what I do to warm up or cool down, and how you think you played, and things like that. But journaling can also be used as a motivation factor. So it might help you train and be a source of encouragement. So basically, keeping a log of everything you've done to prepare for big moments can be really encouraging, and you can look back on it and be reassured that you really did everything that you could to get to that big moment, and be proud of that, and really reflect on all of the accomplishments that you've had along the way and the time and effort that you've put into your sport. Next, we're going to talk about training achievements. So something that I think is really important right now during COVID is to create some kind of reward system for your athletes, especially because the normal reward system of, let's say, winning your provincial and going to nationals might not be there for them anymore. So, I mean, this can work with sports or academics. So setting the goals is obviously step number one and very important. But a reward system is really just a bonus. So they can be as simple as like an hour of leisure activity after a really tough practice together, like the team can have time together. Or maybe for larger goals, it's like buying something that they've really wanted for a long time, or stuff like that. And then the main purpose of the reward system would be to just boost motivation. And yeah, just help find creative alternatives, which will be really useful. So just out of curiosity, have any of you incorporated reward systems over the last 2 years?
Absolutely. I do it every time I'm out on the ice with a group of curlers. I always give them something that they're working for, whether it be chocolate or whether it be a time out with friends and family. Something has to be there as a benefit.
Yeah, definitely. Starbucks. Yeah. That's very true.
Kira,
Yeah.
what's the difference between a reward and a bribe?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, you walk in a very similar line, I think.
Depends if it's your kids or your grandkids.
Yeah. Funny.
You don't have to answer that.
Yeah. Yeah, did anybody have questions about this? No? Okay, let's move on. So next would be routines. So the fundamental value of routines is that they ensure total preparation for athletes' efforts. And routines enable athletes to be completely physically, technically, tactically, and mentally ready to perform their best. So I think what's really important with the pandemic is staying within similar routines as if the clubs were open and you were practicing on ice consistently. So a good way of adjusting to the current situation and all the constant setbacks would be to replace your usual on ice practice with another form of training, whether that be physical training or mental training, visualization, team dynamics, goal setting, whatever it is, to maybe even go so far as to use the same time slots as you would normally be on the ice practicing. And this will just ensure that your team is always moving forward and getting something out of all of the constant setbacks that we keep having in terms of ice time. And this would be very team dependent or individual dependent, but just maintaining strong routines is really important, regardless of level of athlete or engagement. So next, we're going to talk about coaches. And I saved coaches for last, but definitely not least. So how to help as a coach. I think coaches are key to making great teams better. I've done a lot of talking about how athletes can train to improve, but as coaches, you have a lot of power in how the team runs, and how much the athletes are held accountable for their training. So regular check-ins with athletes are really important. And while it's difficult at the present time to maintain motivation for the athletes, it can also be difficult for the coaches as well. So obviously regular check-ins are important. it should be a conversation at the beginning of the season, how often those check-ins are going to occur, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. But it's important for coaches and the athletes to be held accountable now more than ever to focus on their progress. And along with just regular check-ins, goal check-ins every few weeks are really important too. So the need to reevaluate goals and continue to create new ones to strive to be better. It's crucial in terms of motivating the team to continue to train when there are minimal events to look forward to. And just encouraging the team. Coaches can be a great asset in terms of encouragement. Sending regular notes of encouragement to the team is really important, even if it's virtual, or a text every once in a while, just saying, hey, you got this. And then schedule regular team meetings and team bonding activities, whether that's on Zoom or if you can do it in person. But it's just really important to stay in touch and keep up team dynamics, even if there isn't much curling or events to look forward to. I just had a note here. Talent wins game, but teamwork wins championships. So keep working on the little things, and that will go a long way to future success. And then finally, just a quick summary and final thoughts. So we discussed using reframing techniques when unfortunate events occur, so like cancellations. We also discussed the importance of internal motivation, alternative forms of training, developing more of an action-focused approach to competition and training. Obviously, event cancellation is something none of us enjoy or look forward to, but it's really just the reality of our current situation. And I want to reiterate how important it is to just let yourself and your athletes feel the disappointment while also finding ways to maintain your love for the game and alternative forms of motivation. And we touched on the importance of developing mind-muscle connection in order to optimize training potential. So remembering to always be focused and engaged to have the most effective practices and training sessions. And another important addition to pandemic curling is just journaling and routines and reward systems. And last but not least, if you're an athlete, thank your coach. And if you're a coach, give yourself a pat on the back, because it's been a really tough couple of years, and especially to be in your shoes. So I'm sure you've had to think outside the box a lot and be very creative to find ways to make the last 2 years as productive as you can. So thank you for being here with me tonight. I hope you've maybe found something of value that you can take into the rest of your season.
There is absolutely no doubt, Kira, that this has been a valuable session. And, you know, we're coming into another phase of the pandemic. Hopefully we won't be going backwards at any time, but unfortunately it's coming towards the end of the curling season. So a lot of the information and tools that you provided will be invaluable as we move into whatever transition or preseason that we're going into. Are there any questions or comments? Any final thoughts from anybody?
It was a brilliant presentation. I'd really love to get a copy of this. I just have one further comment to make, and it's the difficulty of coaching those who are making a transition in their athletic life, and they're kind of concerned when they move from one age group to another where they don't want to do curling anymore. They're getting into high school and they want to do something different. Is there anything that we can do as coaches to either help them make that transition, or either try to persuade them to be with the athletic side of curling again?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to just always support what the athlete is going through, especially in terms of school, going into high school or even university for that matter. Like, school becomes a lot more important and it takes up more time. So being respectful and always reminding the athlete that, you know, curling doesn't have to be your main priority all the time, but like when you're here, we're going to make the most of it. So just having really productive periods of practice and getting the most out of the limited time that that athlete might have. So I think just reassuring them that, you know, they can do both. They can do school and athletics if they put in the appropriate amount of effort into both, you know, when the time allows them to.
Great, thanks.
Kira, question. You've had tons of success. Talk about one instant of failure and how did you deal with it?
I actually have a really interesting story, maybe not about failure, but like self-talk and negative self-talk. I remember in our U18 national final, it was the first end, and I remember thinking to myself, you know, I'm really proud of us, and I think I'd be okay with the silver medal. And as soon as those words came out of, like, not my mouth, but when I was thinking them, I was like, why did I just think that? Like, that's ridiculous. And it honestly took me the full end to get out of that mindset. Actually, I really do thank the other team for getting me out of that, because one of my teammates burnt a rock about a foot before it was going to touch, like hit out the other rock, and the other team, instead of letting it stay where it would have stayed, they took it out completely. And after that, I was like, okay, we're going to beat them. Like it took that to sort of snap me out of that mindset.
Right.
But yeah, ever since then, I've just been really aware of my self-talk and just trying to experience what I'm thinking and feeling, but then moving past it as quickly as possible.
We have a question. A coach coaches a young junior women's team, and they seem to play well in early ends, but in the last end, they miss shots. I've told them to breathe, visualize, and focus on the process of making the shot, PSR, but they still struggle. Besides just having more experience, do you have any other tips on how to perform under pressure?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. I guess practice, being in situations where you have to focus a lot. Maybe, yeah, that's tough, because I know that our teams have been in similar situations, you know, where we find we struggle later in the game, and it's sort of hard to find that one reason why you are struggling. So it might just be a matter of a lot of self-reflection and maybe a few team meetings to see why the team's feeling that way in the later ends. Maybe it's a lack of focus, or maybe it's just they're thinking too much about the outcome. I know later in the game is when we start to think, oh, well, we're up by 2, so we're probably going to win. So just to, you know, be aware of thinking those things and, you know how to get them out of your head quickly.
Could it be a physical fitness
totally
contribution as well? They get tired towards the end of the game, and
yeah, definitely
that could contribute. Not the whole thing, but
yeah, I think it's just a matter of reps and practice and being aware of why that keeps happening. Mm-hmm. As soon as you know the trend, like it's easier to find the solution. So just knowing the problem is important.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Did you watch them? Webinar. Oh, yes. Okay.
All right. Well, Lee, do you have something, or are you just waving to Kira? Okay. Well, I'd like to thank Kira so much for this. This has been extremely informative. It's a great presentation. All the best going forward, Kira, with your undergraduate degree and in your competitive life as well. The recording is going to be available to you. I will send it to you. And if Kira, if you would share the slides with me, if you're okay with that,
Yeah, of course.
I will share them with everybody as well. So thank you all for attending. It's been a great one. And we'll see everybody sooner rather than later, I hope. And good luck in any competitions that are coming up.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you so much.